Well, hello, beautiful community. I am needing to show a little bit of civilian courage because I am on the border of just about being up to being vertical and having a little casual chat with you about Bashkortostan protests. That's because my health has been in a challenging phase over recent weeks, and that's why the main channel video about the breakup of Russia is delayed. But that video actually is making progress little by little, and in a way matched by sort of some rapid clarifications and illustrations that will actually go into some of the issues that everyone's talking about in connection with the Bashkortostan protests. So watch out for that coming soon, and anticipate some action finally on the main channel. The only thing I've said so far on the community post and on Twitter about the Bashkortostan protest is this, and that's where we should land actually, but perhaps I'll make a few simple remarks before we land on that point. The Bashkortostan protest isn't people having clear views about what's wrong and acting on them. Rather, views about what's wrong follow from people's sense of their own capacity to act. That's what's dangerous for the Kremlin, a multi-motive protest which could evolve. Let's land on that in a moment, but first let me make a couple of remarks. Now we're talking about something that'll become clearer perhaps after the main channel video, but we're talking about one of the ethnic regions of Russia. The thing about those is that in the majority of them, the ethnic group isn't the majority. And you've either got a situation where the Russians are the majority, ethnic Russians are a majority, or it's a mix with no group being a majority. And in Bashkortostan, it's roughly the case. So you can assume that there's a sort of a bigger third of the population there that's ethnically Russian, and the second biggest group will be the Bashkirs, and the third group would be the Tatars. And the spirit of this protest has an anti-imperial element, and the texture of the protest has a freshness. So let's say a little bit about both, and then land on the comment I read out. The freshness comes from the fact that if you are a pro-Western democracy Russian citizen, you've either left the country or you're sort of silenced and asphyxiated, and you're feeling that you've had 477 confrontations with the regime, and you've come out on the wrong end of them. So you feel sort of backed into a corner and dejected and depleted. But these people protesting, I would guess, for the most part, do not feel that they're fundamentally against the Putin regime, or they're fundamentally against the war. There are elements of both there too, of course. And there's a kind of a freshness for them. Some of them are close to experiencing something unacceptable being generated by the regime, nearly for the first time. And I say almost nearly because there's a history of protest in that region, and the persecution of the activist that's triggered the protest is also known for protest and activism against, above all, against limestone mining over recent years. So it's the freshness of somebody who is coming into a dynamic of feeling, whoa, that is not okay at all. For the first time, not for the 1,741st time. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it's an important element. There's an element of freshness to that, whereas there's no element of freshness to we want a parliamentary democracy like Denmark, kind of Russians, because they have gone through the mill, really. So what's anti-imperial? I mean, about this whole enterprise, is it a secession, pro-secession protest? No, it's not. But the spirit of it, though, is a kind of nationalism that says we are centering ethnic group rights, even though this is not a strictly ethnic protest. It's a mix. There's lots of different folks in it, and in many ways it just scooped up different citizenry. So don't think this is just an ethnic and religious enterprise. But nevertheless, of all the things that it involves, arguably the main one is a kind of ethnic rights and a kind of centering of ethnic rights and ethnic minorities, need for ethnic autonomy. I'm sorry, I'm doing my best. And if you attach a cartoon to that, it's going to go something like this. We're not terribly against this whole Putin thing. We're not terribly against the war, though we don't love our people being taken to it, and maybe they're not being taken to it in a fair way, and then it's being taken there too much, and blah, blah, blah. And there were elements of the protest which were positively bordering on being anti-war, but preponderantly it wasn't fundamentally anti-Putin, anti-war. But what it was is we are, if not loyal, at least accustomed or acclimatized to you guys, Moscow guys. So why do you keep parachuting people in who have to come and then run our affairs? We don't like that. So a centering on ethnic group belonging, a linking of that to autonomy, not just for the ethnic group, but for everybody else in the region that the ethnic group shares with the other ethnic groups in the region and with the Russians. Where's our autonomy? And it's fair to ask this because we're not doing anything terrible. We're not saying that everything about this regime is wrong, everything about this war is wrong. So there's a kind of a passive loyalty there, if you like, loyalty light. So given we give you that, where's our autonomy? That's the spirit, right? Stop messing with us and stop having regional heads mess with us who are parachuted in from Moscow. And that's a Russia-wide sentiment. Either it's expressed or it's subtly present all over the country. It's an entirely separate question where this stuff leads to, right? And then it's another question where this stuff leads to if it continues to be spectacularly mishandled by the Kremlin. It doesn't lead automatically to one outcome, right? So don't think of this picture I've painted you as a secessionist claim. It's not. Now, fundamentally, even though we can list a set of complaints that are sort of floating about in the protest, and we can list some background disquiet, which is disquiet with the war, disquiet with the economic situation. Fundamentally, though, what we've got to understand is what Greg Udin perhaps is best at emphasizing, and that is that forget about this order, well, people form a set of grievances and then they act. No, people realize that they have a space to act and that they have an actionable alternative to move toward, an actionable alternative to the current reality, toward which they could take some sort of agent coherent steps, right? So who's going to do what, how, and when, right? We can come out, we can demand this and that, and blah, 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 and then ooh. So it's through that sense of, oh, I can do some things to make this politics around me go differently. And as I begin doing them, I can see more about what they really entail and more about what other things I can do, and so on and so forth. So it's this sense of agency that then leads people to develop a view of everything going on around them. So it doesn't make any sense delving in too deeply about everything these people believe and don't believe. That's not how things work. And that's the danger for the Kremlin. That in a certain sense, it doesn't matter what triggers the protest. It doesn't matter how ecologically minded the protest is. It doesn't matter how specific to original issue the protest is. Because if protest persists, and then it appears in other places, then it's the fact of taking action that's then going to lead to people developing a certain picture. And so once you start on a protest that may have had a few sort of local, a few ecological triggers, get a sense of agency, then you might develop views about the war, you might develop views about, I'm not saying it's going to happen this time, this is something that could take years, but you develop a kind of a consciousness of all the other key issues, and you have a view on them. And then suddenly it might come to be the case that, and again, Greg is very good, Greg Uden is very good at making this point, that something that you just took for granted, perhaps as a kind of inevitability, now seems like a reality to which there could be some alternatives. And so you suddenly take what you last year found sort of fatalistically inevitable, and today find it outrageously unjust and intolerable and unacceptable. And it's very, very significant how far processes like this develop around the country and how destructive the Kremlin is at handling them. Of course, the single most destructive thing the Kremlin could do here is the war it is prosecuting against its neighbor, Ukraine. So these are some very, very brief thoughts, and I've tried to be careful not to tread on regional expertise or on the expertise of folks who really understand patterns of activism in Russia, and try to speak about this in broad brushstrokes. But yeah, I recommend to watch how this develops. I recommend to watch regions in Russia where there's a recent history of protest, and keep in mind this structure that you act and then develop a picture of the world second. That's the order in which it works. As counterintuitive as it might seem, that's the reality. And that, of course, there's a freshness, as we said, to this protest, and a special kind of difficulty also for the Kremlin, because the fact that the protest is not obviously anti-war and anti-Putin creates a challenge for how the Kremlin responds, because the Kremlin likes a very clean distinction between overt opposition and people who have grievances the Kremlin might recognize. And the overt opposition is seen not as opposition, but as foreign interference, right? Malign foreign interference, bad stuff, little bombs under the regime, as it were, in a malicious way placed by enemies from outside. That's how Putin sees Navalny, for example. But it's a different story responding to the mothers of mobilized. It's a different story responding to this rather fluid and mixed motive dynamic of protest in Bashkortostan. What the Kremlin will be asking is, are they calling for us to go? And the answer there is no, they're not. And then, although they're calling for the parachuting of regional heads to go, as a thing that shapes how the country is run. So there is a anti-centralization, autonomy-driven demand there. But they're not quite calling for us to go directly. So, okay. And what's the second thing we check? I think the second thing we check is, are our key policies incompatible with what they're asking? And then we have to clamp down if that seems to be really the case. And then when the Kremlin clamps down, having taken a view on the protest, because of the freshness of the protest, the outrage would redouble, because if you are a Russian pro-Western politics person, you'd have been clamped down upon many times. But these folks don't expect the whole thing to come down on them. They're not against the regime necessarily. So that's potentially quite politicizing. I've run about in circles quite a bit. I think that's added some value and some clarity about how we're watching it for now. I'm very grateful that you've been with me, and I hope to be with you soon on better form. Lots and lots of love, and watch out for the main channel video. Let me make a personal remark. I tweeted this too. When with a modicum of violence, big modicum of violence, my condition stops me from doing what I love for the majority of each day, I have two feelings. One is, wow, this is a bad illness to have, myalgic encephalomyelitis. And the second feeling I have, what a miracle and what a wonder of the world, how much I am able to do. Because in many ways what I'm able to do feels unobvious. I have a level of engagement and contribution and exploration and sharing and loving exchange with the world that rather runs ahead what might seem to be obviously possible given the limitations I live with at the moment. And so isn't that a kind of miracle with which I'm privileged? Lots and lots of love.